So, good afternoon, and welcome to our first session of our education series titled, What's That Lily? We thank you for your interest and time in learning more about lilies. People have lots of interests and demands, and we appreciate that you are giving some of your time to one of our favorite subjects, lilies. I am Brian Bergman, and as I said, Peggy said, my co host is Judith Freeman. We'll be leading today's session. Today's subjects will be Division 1 and 3. These are the Asiatic lilies and the Euro-Caucasian lilies. In this session, we will become familiar with how to identify and distinguish cultivars and how cultivars have developed. My co-host, Judith Freeman, brings archival knowledge of cultivar development. She will give you insights and understanding of lilies that we grow in our gardens. This will help in distinguishing your cultivars as well as giving new perspectives when looking at your lilies. The rich history of what you have in your garden will be now at your fingertips. In session 2 in February, we will delve into Division 2, the Martigons, with Alberta expert Lori Hepper. Alberta is the center of Martigons in North America. She will introduce us to what cultivars are available, what they look like, and give us some growing guidelines as well as guidelines for showing these lilies. Session 3 and 4 will be co-hosted with Judith again. We will cover trumpets, orientals, and species in session 3, and interdivisional and longiflorum lilies in session 4. Judith will show how lilies transition from the past to the modern garden. Here we will get a view from the past that created our present world of knowledge of lilies. We will learn what to do based on past mistakes, and she will mention those and our present knowledge. Okay, so let's get started. Here we go. Next slide. I want you to all be reminded about what a lily is. The principal parts of a lily are a true lily, not a daylily, not a plantain lily, but a true lily, Lilium. We have the bulb, a concentric bulb. We have a stem, and the flowers arise from a single stem. On the flowers aspect, we have, they're called tepals, that's sepals and petals, or you can just call them petals to be technical. We also have a stigma, and we have anthers and filaments. Okay, next slide. Oh, here we got the bigger picture. Thank you. And again, there's the stigma. It's going to be important to pay attention to those stigmas and to the anthers, because the anthers contain the pollen. And that can give us ideas on how lilies, what type of cultivar you have. Okay, next, please. And a reminder, the lilies arise from a concentric bulb. The Asiatic and Caucasian, or Euro-Caucasian, rise from a centric bulb, bulb with basal roots and stem roots. Okay, let's get started. We're going to start with Division 3. That's the Candidum and Monodelphum are the most common of these species, and that you will see in this division. Most of the other ones you will not see. Okay, next, Euro-Caucasian hybrids. Candidum and Monodelphum the Madonna lily grows in the Mediterranean basin. It is noted in biblical pictures as the lilies of the field. And as Judith says, what did you say, Judith, about the lilies of the field?
Actually, they were not. It was not, but it sounded good. And so when they brought Madonna lilies, they brought them back from the Crusades. The thing, lilies in the Bible just means flowers. So,
Okay.
but so many people associate it with that's why. And you always see it as the symbol of Mary in the religious art from the Renaissance. They always have a picture of her.
Now, Candidum blooms in the early spring, and it goes dormant in the summer. And as we're going to find out, extremely prone to botrytis. Next. 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 Oh, are we frozen, Lynn? Can you hear me, Judith?
Oh, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I just was waiting for it to spring forth.
I know. Okay. Do you want to go over this then for me?
Oh, do you want me to tell you what those are?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. If you look at Candidum on the right, crossed with this beautiful red, chalcedonicum, which is extremely difficult to grow too. I've never been able to keep it. But this you see all the time when you cross the white with a red in the certain groups, and you get a muting, a dilution of the color, and that's what testasium is written. It looks buff colored, but if you pressed that and made paper chromatograms, you would see it's the same pigment. It's just diluted as the carotenes that are in the middle cell layers. So, but testasium is a beautiful lily.
And that's the
And
top one.
yeah, and it first appeared, the top one, it first appeared as a natural hybrid in like lily fields where they were producing commercial numbers of these, and it took people a while to figure out where that came from. But the interesting thing is you can back cross that. You can pollinate that with candidum. And the picture on the left is a picture taken from Ruth Class's yard many years ago, and it is candidum. It's testasium back crossed with pollinated with candidum, and you get the orange flowers. The orange pollen has come out, the deeper color has come back out. So there are
And
lots
that's
of
where,
things that, yeah, we still want to, I would love to see people do.
and
It,
look at the dark pollen there. That's
yeah,
very
yeah,
important. If you look on
yeah,
the right, you've got yellow pollen, and
yeah,
on the left, you've got a dark orange pollen, very
yeah.
similar to
It's almost
potassium.
red. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Next slide. Okay. One of the first hybrids was June fragrance, and then there was fragrance. You want to go over this, Judith?
Okay, Charles Robinson was in our round robin, and he was a wonderful hybridizer, and he was interested. There are a group of us who are interested in these, and we kind of spurred one another on. But he was for sure the first person to cross candidum with monadelphum, and you can see it's a soft cream yellow. So I was so inspired by this, I thought we want to try this too. And Lynn Marshall in Wyoming was growing a lot of monadelphum, so we sent him pollen, and he sent me back all these pods, and out of 40 pods I got one embryo, and that produced the plant that's the reciprocal cross. So it has monadelphum as the mother, but you see how similar they are, how similar the buds, the inflorescence, the soft yellow, almost white color. So anyway, we thought I was so thrilled with his cross that we named this one Fragrance, to distinguish that it was a different clone, but that it was, he had it first. So Robbie was first.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and these are some of Judith's crosses.
Yeah, these are some, and I had a lot of, this is the same thing. It's Candidum cross monadelphum, or the reciprocal, pollinated with fertile diploid Asiatics. And you always get these pale colors. The carotenes are there, but mostly you get the pale color, and mostly you get the flower form down to out facing, but occasionally I did get a few that were up facing, uprising, and that's why I called it uprising. And then the one on the right was distinctly greenish tinted. We called it limerick. But of course, they all eventually, for me, got botrytis. And I think they do much better where it's really cold in the winter, because they also don't like to have wet bulbs. So,
And dry in the summer.
yeah, dry in the summer. Yeah, yeah.
Next slide. Okay.
Okay, this is Fialcovaya. This was the first this is purely monadelphum, so it doesn't have any candidum. This is monadelphum crossed with, Fialcovaya was bred in Russia, and it's crossed with a bulbiferum, or a bulbiferum hybrid. And this picture, that's below, that shows the close-up of the first generation, you see right away you've got both the parents represented. You see the form, and if you smelled it, it smells just like monadelphum. And then I pollinated this ton of embryos, trying to work that to get those in. And while I was waiting to go to the hospital before Catherine, who's in the picture on the right, to be born, I did about 100 embryo cultures. And this is what I got in the second generation, back crossing them to red and pink Asiatics. And you can still see, if it's a true cross, you will see very distinct things from both parents. So what we were trying to get out of here was this tremendous cold hardiness and the fragrance. So,
And look at the leaves. Look at the structure
yeah,
of the stem.
yeah,
See how that is very reminiscent of Candidum or Mondelphum.
yeah. And look at the hairs on the pedestals of the one below, yeah. Look on the pedestal; they're very furry, and that's also characteristic of the monodelphum inheritance. Yeah. I can look at
Okay,
those and I can just smell them.
next
Okay.
slide. Okay, and then we have some other interdivisional hybrids from Division 3 that Darm Crook has done from the Northwest Territories. See, he has dry summers and he has cold winters, so
Yeah.
they can stay dormant. Okay, next slide. And these are, you would like to tell?
Well, you can see this is very characteristic. Savicianum and monodelphum are very close. They're really probably part of geographical variations of the same hugely spread species monodelphum. So they always have this cream soft yellow color. And another thing, you don't see it so well, but you see they have a great inflorescence and very characteristic bud shape. And usually the tip of the bud and the base of the bud have a dark wine color, and that will come out in some of their hybrids, which is most interesting, I think. But look at those wonderful inflorescences and see how different that is from the inflorescence of any of the other lilies. I mean, it's very distinct.
Next slide. And here's another cross of Monodelphum with Candidum. And it looks a little bit more like Candidum, but it's there. Okay, next slide. And then,
This is the reciprocal cross, and this looks to me more like Hollandicum cross Doricum, but I would not say that, I'm just giving you my opinion. And I would love to see more work done with these same lines. I want everybody to try it out who's in a place that's got cold winters. The other thing they like is limey soils, and that can be a problem sometimes.
and dry summers, dry
Yeah,
summers.
for sure. Oh, yeah.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's this section. Any questions? There is some in the chat.
I believe the only question we have in the chat is some of the terms, diploid, reciprocal, etc.
Oh, diploid just means it's just like you are. It means it has two sets of chromosomes, and one came from your mother and one came from your father, and you got half a set from each parent. But the ones that are not diploid, you get these weird things when the pollen grains or the eggs are being formed in which they don't go through the last division that they should. And so that's how you get a lot of these interspecific hybrids that seem sterile, but they'll produce it's called an unreduced gamete. And so the next generation, and this is true of all the June fragrance hybrids, they all have 3 sets of chromosomes, and that's how come it happens. Reciprocal just means the other direction. So like if it's Candidum, the first one listed is the mother. Candidum cross Monodelphum, that's June fragrance. Monodelphum was the mother, cross Candidum, then that's the reciprocal cross. And there are a few plants in which the genes are cytoplasmically inherited, and they're not inherited by the chromosomes. And so then it matters which way it goes. And sometimes it matters which way it goes, just because sometimes the pollen won't grow down the tube or they have teeny tiny stigmas. But usually, genetically, I've hardly seen any lilies in which it mattered which direction they went in. They should, if it's a true cross, they should look the same. So there are a few genes for pollen-free or male sterile lilies that are inherited by the cytoplasm, but not many. So
Okay. Okay, thank you, Judith. So let's go on to Division 1, the Asiatics. That was very well done, Judith. Okay, so we're going to go into the Asiatics, Division 1. And again, to remind you, the principal parts of the plant, there's the bulb, the stem, the flowers come on top. And we got to look at the close-up of the flower again, just to remind you, because on this section of that, we will be looking at the flower very closely. Next slide. And we have the stigma, which is that little thing in the center right there. Thank you. That's the stigma. And then around it is the anthers with the filaments. And the anthers contain the pollen. And then we have the flower. structure, the rest of the flower. Next slide. So we start with enchantment, one of the first really commercial lilies in the cut and dry flower trade. In fact, it started out in the dry trade, and the dry trade means the garden trade. Okay. In fact, in these 1970s, it was the lily in commercial production and predates the Dutch interest in lilies being cut flowers. And that's the beginning of commercial lily production was enchantment. Next slide. And this is information from Peter Schenk in his presentation in Ontario in 2001. There's a field, Oregon Bulb Farms, there's a field of enchantment. It just goes on forever and ever. And on the right-hand side, we have graphs. And the top graph shows you in the 70s, the very peaked one was enchantment, and then it disappeared by the 90s. The next one is Connecticut King, and the next one is Stargazer. And things were changing. Total acreage of Oregon Bulb Farms was probably the largest. It was probably the largest grower of lilies in the world in the 70s and 80s. In the late 1980s, Oregon Bulb Farms grew 185 acres of lilies versus the Dutch that in all of Holland only grew 325 acres. So they were a major commercial producer of lilies. And a lot of our cultivars come from our Oregon Bulb Farms of that era. Next slide. After enchantment, things changed. And thanks to Judith Freeman, thank you, Judith, and Eddie McRae at Oregon Bulb Farms, the world of lilies was expanded. As the Dutch cut flower gained commercial interest, Oregon Bulb Farms shifted to breeding cut flowers. Judith felt this limited the range of lilies and started Columbia Plat with Len Marshall to focus on garden lilies. And I have to say something here. The lilies you get now, the commercial lilies from Holland, are cut flower lilies. They are designed to only last a couple years, if that. The whole reason for growing is to cut the stem off and take the flower and to send it to the florist. So remember that. So if you're complaining about how the new lilies you get disappear, that's because they're designed not to last. The Dutch want to keep changing cultivars so that they can make more money. Okay, sorry, I sidetracked here. It started with encouragement from the NALS round robin that included breeders Ruth Kloss, Henry Payne, Charles Robson, Joe Mattis, and Laverne Freeman, and Len Marshall. And they were the generous teachers.
They were wonderful. And I think that's why even a group like this, where we're getting to know each other online, it kind of fills that same niche, because you always learn so much, and we really spurred each other on because each one had their particular interests, but they got us all. You learned from all these people, and they learned from you. And I got into doing embryo culture because all of these people had their certain things they wanted to try. And so that's how I got connected with Len Marshall, who is an insurance guy from Wyoming and also bred canaries, among other things. But he wanted to breed miniature lilies. And so he asked me if I would do some of his embryos. And I did through Charles Robinson. We swapped a lot of material, and he was a good friend of Emerson Hickling, and he sent him June fragrance to pollinate, and then Emerson Hickling would send me pods in cornflake boxes, and I would culture the embryos. So it was really fun for me, because I first went to work at Oregon Bulb Farms because they didn't really have a geneticist. Eddie knew how to do the basic breeding, but there was a lot of things that they wanted to do that he wasn't particularly interested in, and he did not like to keep records. So I was supposed to do the records and figure out easier ways to try things like embryo culturing. So that was what I did. But it's not as interesting if they've all got to have upright flowers and short stems and short leaves. You think how huge the genus Lilium is, and I wanted to expand it as widely as possible. And the people in our round robin had all kinds of great ideas and told me how to go about it.
Okay, next slide. So here we go. How to tell a lily. What is the difference between Sally and tiger babies? Sally is not registered in the RHS. but tiger babies group is. And tiger babies is pink tiger times mixed Asiatic pollen, hybridized in 1973 by Leslie Woodruff, named in 1979. So, and Judith found out it was a buff colored flower, pink tiger.
Yeah.
And pink tiger was regale cross unknown cross a diploid lancifolium. Now, on the two pictures here, one is supposedly Sally and one is supposedly tiger babies. Now, that's what I Googled. And now we'll see what are the real tiger babies and the real Sally. Next.
And what makes that confusing is that they later used, the Dutch guys who were selling some garden lilies, used the name pink tiger, not like a cultivar name, but just to mean it was a pink pendant lily. And so their lily was not the same as the one that was from Leslie Woodruff, that was a combination between a trumpety lily and an Asiatic that was predominantly tigrinum, which you could see in its stem bulbs.
Okay.
But a lot of people have made that same cross then with Leslie Woodruff's true pink tiger. And what amazed me is how similar they all are. And it took me many years to figure out, why are a lot of these things so similar? Always the same color. And that, you know, if it had an orange, you know, if it was an orange cross with the, you know, with a red, I mean, all these different combinations gave you this same thing. And the reason they're so similar is they came from an unreduced gamete in the mother. So it carries a full set, a diploid set of chromosomes, equal amounts from the mother, the father, and then the next generation's father, you know. So they all have 3 sets of chromosomes, and that's the way the pigmentation pattern works. And so you soon will be able to look at a flower in a show and you can pretty well tell where it came from. So
here we have
yeah,
we
go
have
ahead.
Sally and tiger babies.
Yeah.
Sally is on the right, and tiger babies. The top picture is tiger babies. The bottom picture is tiger babies and 2 other TAs, right?
Yeah, yes, 2 other trumpet Asiatics that I got from Barry Stroman that were bred by Wilbert Ronald. And you see those how they don't have tiger babies in them, but you see how the genes work. You see that color, and always with a deeper throat. Yeah.
So look at the speckling on the right. That's Sally. And look at the speckling on the left. That's tiger babies at the top. Okay.
And tiger
next.
babies actually was 3 clones, and one of them, the one that's mostly that has been taken over by the Dutch, is specklier, but you can tell. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Here we go. Next slide. And here we have supposedly 3 stems of tiger babies. Now, is a difference, but note all 3 stems came from the same garden at the same time. So it wasn't growing conditions that changed the color. Note the spots of the first 2 stems. See where the spots are more centered towards the center of the flower, the nectary. And the final one on the right, look at the color of the buds. Look at the shape of the flower in the inflorescence. You can also look at the foliage is slightly different. So this one could be the true Sally, or as Judith would say, it's one of the.
I'll send you a slide of the one it could be. So, but they are so similar. And then there was a couple of clones that came from Czechoslovakia. There was one from Joe Mattis that was called Katinka. And if you have black and white picture, they all look just the same. But you learn, this is what, you know, look at the slight difference in the angles of the secondaries. I mean, you could tell the different clones apart, but you can see that they're so similar. That's why I did not name the distinct clones in tiger babies, but I had notes on them and their RHS colors and everything, but they were so similar that I introduced them as a strain. Yeah.
Okay, next slide. And here's Katinka from Czechoslovakia, was it?
No, this is from Joe Mattis. He bred Katinka.
Joe. Yeah. Okay, Joe Mattis. Okay. And you notice the paler color, but the spotting is similar. And you notice there is a little bit of difference in the pink flush there. And if you look at the inflorescence, you can tell that top picture, which is an ideal grown one. See how the inflorescence is better structured.
Yeah.
Okay. But they're similar. Okay, next slide. And we have Morden butterfly. And where did Morden butterfly come from? Morden butterfly came from pink tiger cross black butterfly. That's why Wilbert called it because Morden was where he was stationed at the time. So he called it Morden butterfly from black butterfly. So it's got, so notice the inflorescence. It's very similar to Sally, tiger babies, and Katinka because it's got the pink tiger, Leslie's pink tiger in it. Next slide. And here's pink giant, or what they call pink tiger now. And pink giant is what is hybridized by the Dutch. It was a pink tiger from the Dutch crossed with lancifolium cross unknown. This is what you see today. This is called pink tiger or pink giant.
They just called everything that meant it wasn't, calling it tiger just meant it was not an up-facing lily. So they called,
It was
you
just
know,
like a tiger,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the tiger lily. That's why they
yeah,
called it
yeah.
that.
So
Okay,
this
next.
contains no trumpet ancestry. That's the point, because
Yes.
they're pink tiger. These are all mostly Davidii. That's what you really, Davidii tigerinum and a little cernuum thrown in to make it pink.
Pink. Okay, next slide. Now, here we got some of Judith's flirt and brushmark.
Yeah,
Brushstroke.
and this is, you can look at these and kind of guess that they are sister seedlings that came out of the same cross, and you'll see more subtle differences in how this brush gene is expressed. And in the one on the right on flirt, you've got little, Ruth Class called these pencil marks or mascara marks, and that always has a frilly edge. So I thought, oh, that sounds like a flirtatious girl with her mascara, eyelashes, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's a much shorter lily, and it remains a soft yellow. Brushstroke sometimes opens as a soft yellow, but it will be white by the second or third day, and it's much taller, much broader petals, smooth petals, and the petals are really not very pointed. They're kind of lobed. And one of the characteristics of the brush marks is that they're not completely constant. The amount of light has an influence on how much they're expressed. So,
okay, next slide. So Hartle Gilman, we've heard of Hartle Gilman Gardens, and it was started after the death of Dean's father, Herb Hartle, with Robert Gilman, who was a dentist, who was talking to Herb, and they decided they would grow some lilies. And Richard Prochaska,
Prochaska.
he wanted to move on to hybridizing Hemercalis and Hosta, so he sent his lily bulbs to the Hartle Gilman people, and they eventually named some of his seedlings. And they were growing a lot of lilies in the 80s to the late 1990s. They were doing a lot of introductions. Next slide. Now, can you tell the difference between Anita Gale, Iowa Rose, and Cupid's Gift? They're all pink. Iowa Rose, now we get into looking at details. Iowa Rose has a purple stigma, as you can see on the left picture, and has more mid coloring in the mid-tepal range. Anita Gale has a yellow stigma, upper right. And look at the color of the anthers. See, there's major difference in the color of the anthers. Also notice Anita Gale has a little yellow streak, not a mid, it's a streak more so, whereas.
It's like an extension of the nectary furrow. And you see that a lot of times you'll see the color that's inside the petal.
And Cupid's Gift, you see those wonky petals, and you see they have bigger spots.
Oh, yeah.
So it's starting to easier to tell the difference. And now next slide. And when you look at the plant, here we go.
You really see the difference in the inflorescences. Another way you can tell it, Iowa Rose does have some greater substance because it's a triploid. And I worked with it for a while before I figured out that it was a triploid. And that's why. Another way you can tell that is that the anthers, the pollen is not fluffy, quite as fluffy, and that's often the case.
So Anita Gale is on the right-hand side. And look at this color of the stems of Anita Gale versus Iowa Rose. So you have to look at all these differences to understand what cultivar you have. Okay, next slide. Bullseye, bred and named by our friend Judith at Columbia Platt, was one of the many brush marks introduced in the 1980s. All the trace back to a single, as you want to mention this, Judith, go ahead.
Okay, this was a from the F2 population of leech Maxima wixii leech linii across Darkham, and then in the second generation, there was one plant that had these this brushed effect, and it was dominant. So we gave pollen around to a lot of different people. So suddenly there were just tons of these because it was a dominant gene.
Next slide. And then here we're getting some more. We have candle flame and willowwood. And what is the difference? They're very similar looking, but you have to look at the details. Willowwood, look at that bud. It has that hairy bud, the pubescent bud. Candle flame blooms later, and it has clear buds. And the stigma, it's hard to tell on this picture, but the stigma, Willowwoods is a clear yellow stigma, and Candle Flame has a purple three-pointed star stigma. You can sort of see it on the one, but
Candle flame has broader overlapping petals, and that's
that's the
very
other thing
vague,
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really obvious. Look what a
and
great
bigger
inflorescence.
inflorescence. Yes,
Yeah, isn't
yes.
that fabulous?
Next slide. Okay, and then we have Black-Eyed Cindy. And the top picture on the far upper right, is that Black-Eyed Cindy? I'm not too sure. The two bottom pictures are, if you look at the left picture, that is classic Black-Eyed Cindy. You look at the shape of the petals, and that is classic. And then you look at bottom, that's the plant. Now the top one, if you look at the pollen, look how bright it is. So I believe it could be Black-Eyed Cindy, but because of if you look at the pollen has probably been enhanced, so that makes that flower look a little different. So when you got to notice these things, especially when you're Googling and trying to figure out what flower it is, you got to notice sometimes things get a little modified. Okay, next slide.
Another thing about
Oh,
when you
sorry.
see a picture in print, a lot of times your picture will look perfect on the screen and you think that's exactly the right color. But I learned this from my daughter Catherine when she had to do the color separations for our catalog. The ones that are in the and on your screen, it's one type of RMK or whatever it's called, and the other is CMYK that are printer's inks. And there's some colors that you cannot render with printer's inks, but you have to make sure you really know what the lilies look like. And so that might have looked fine on the screen, and then if you took a picture from a print picture, it could be, they've tried to make it look right, but it doesn't, and you would know right away that this was a deeper gold upper right, a deeper gold color, and that also made the anthers go a deeper orange, tend toward orange. So
Okay.
sometimes it's people with the best of intentions, they're trying to print the right color, but that's when you see the ones where they're purple and all these weird colors, and you think you need to use Photoshop a little better.
Okay. The North hybrids are the most elegant of garden lilies, and they are garden lilies. These were developed during the late 1960s by Chris North, a pioneer in the use of embryo culture. He hybridized the first series, named them after the Greek gods using Asiatic species. Most of these were successful, but the most successful was with lancifolium, with a selection of hybrids that would add more vigor, disease resistance, and color. In the second phase, which we all love these phase, are the Lankagenses. And he introduced Lankagensi to get the pink and the perfume. And the important thing, the botrytis resistance. 10 were selected, and they are known as the North lilies. Next slide.
And they were all named for the women in his family, which I think is very special. And I have, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Ariadne, I especially love, and that's one of the lilies I think would have been lost to cultivation if I just thought this must not be lost. It's a fabulous lily, and it combines the beautiful pink color and fragrance. It's diluted, but it's there. It combines that with a long inflorescence from Davidii, and that gives it more virus tolerance, and it gives it more resistance to fusarium. If you have a hot, wet summer, you can still have problems. But one thing I always see in Ariadne, do you see coming in the very middle of the petal, the little red flush that extends from the nectary, or the little pink? It's a little pinker there. And another thing it always shows, you see on the picture bottom left, is you'll see a little a little crook. It's not a straight stem. It goes in little stems. You see it particularly. It'll go up and down, angled slightly, and so
Yeah,
you can
see the
pick it out
main
for that.
picture on the right-hand side, you can see that little kink.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And the pinkness of it depends on how cool the temperatures are, and
And
how
the
bright the
photography.
light is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, next slide. Arrows.
I
Okay, go
really
ahead.
love it. I love arrows. Let me put my cap down for a minute. The arrows has got it's the only one that has a lot of tigrinum, and you see that right away. It flowers much later than the others. The buds are really furry, and it also makes nice big pods. You don't usually get anything out of them, but it does make pods, so it's probably a good one to try to breed with if you are where it's hotter than it is here. So, but I really love arrows.
Okay.
And the foliage is almost bluish tinted. It's really got a distinctive color. So if you saw it on the show stem, besides some other pinkies, you would see the foliage was distinctly a different color.
Next slide. And then we have a number of others. There's Hannah. Oh, it's just plain Hannah. That's right. Hannah, Iona, Rosemary, and Pan. Hannah, you will not see. Rosemary is very hard to find. Iona and Pan, you can still have. And Judith, you want to talk about
Oh,
Pan
we have lots of Iona
and
because it
Iona?
just grows super well. You can tell he didn't name that himself. It's a hybrid that came. He handed the bulb to friends who grew it and said, no, this should be named. And you can see right away it's a generation later because it does have bigger flowers, but it grows very well. I really love Iona. So
Okay. Next slide. And then there's Peggy North and Karen North. Go and
and
talk about them.
well, I love Peggy. It's the most speckly one of all. It carries the genes for making stem bubbles. So I keep trying to cross it with things that carry that gene too. So maybe we'll get some with stem bubbles, which would be fun. It's a bright, vivid orange, whereas Karen is a sort of a soft coral color. In our fields, it's quite corally. If you're where it's hot, really hot in the summer, it's not. But it's a much more typical small flowered Davidii type, hybrided. I first met Dr. North. Well, I met him when he was in Scotland, or when I was quite young, but he also, when he came to our house, he was on his way to Boston to visit his son who was marrying Karen. So that's what they were there for. And so I always see that and remember, and it gives me a special pleasure to remember the fun we had when he was there.
Okay. Next slide. And then there's a second generation hybrids from Ariadne.
Yeah, and these are all, if you use a lot of pollen, and you'll usually get 1 or 2 embryos per pod. So you do have to do a lot of pods to get some special things. Midsummer's Eve flowers later than some of the others, but it's a nicer pink. White peach lace, because it has white butterflies, which is a pumilum hybrid behind it. You get the same color. It looks very similar in color in the field to Ariadne, but it flowers about 3 weeks at least earlier. So I'm always looking. I always want to breed for diversity, but I want the whole range of flowering times.
Okay. Next slide. Now we're going into the black lilies. So many dark reds trace back to Canadian hybrids. Simonette's black butterfly was the pollen parent for the burgundy strains at OBF. And here is black butterfly on the left and red knight on the right. And these were used for breeding black lilies. Next. So, black lilies. It's hard to tell by the color sometimes because the color can vary an awful lot depending on temperature. Landini, which is the top slide, is the oldest and it's still in production. It doesn't last too long because it probably gets botrytis. They all get botrytis, the dark black lilies. But look at now. We have to look at the flower structure. Very important. The top one has a cup-shaped flower. It hasn't got very little pollen or no pollen. And if you look at the stigma, there's a little bit of yellowness to it. Now I put in Night Rider on the left. That's the darkest one. It is a TA, which means it's a trumpet cross Asiatic.
I want
But
somebody to dig up a bulb, and I want to see if it has a pink bulb. Then I'll believe it.
yes, yes. Okay, we'll be talking about
Yeah.
bulbs and bulb color
Yeah, because
in
I
the
mean, I have a lot
OTs.
to learn too about these. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And one on the far right hand bottom one, that's Dark Secret. That is the latest that's come out in production. And you look at the shape of the flower and the shape of the petals and look at the pollen color. Also, look at the buds. Now, the buds, the color of the buds and the size of the buds is very important because most of these cut flowers, millions of cut flowers, they go into the clock in Holland. And at the clock, they're all in bud. They're not flowering. So they look at the size of the bud and the color of the bud to determine how much they're going to pay for that group of lilies. So the bigger the bud, the darker the bud, the more money they get. Okay. So remember, Landini's cup shaped and the flower petals are sort of a little bit pointed and separate, where the Dark Secret, the new one coming out, it's got more pollen color and also a flatter flower.
Another thing, Brian, very often in these dark ones is you'll see the nectary fur. The nectary will have a little fur and be frosty, and you'll see differences. Some of them have white nectary
little
fur,
flecks in
and
the
that's really
nectary.
pretty.
Yes. Okay, next one. And then we have Black Charm and Secret Kiss. They both came out at the same time, but Black Charm was a better grower, and that's the one on the right. And you see the size of the
Look at
inflorescence.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Isn't
but
that
look at the
amazing?
color of the buds too. They don't stay they're not as dark colored further up as Secret Kiss. Secret Kiss, look at the color of the anthers. See how orange the anthers are, and that's the big difference between the two of them. Secret Kiss is a little darker, but you never can tell because temperature has a real major factor in showing color. So remember with these dark lilies, also they won't last long because most of them will get botrytis. That's the problem. Okay, next slide.
I would like
Oh.
to make a comment because Janice wrote in about told me that on the chat thing it said that the bulbs of the TA were the one that's supposed to be were light pink. But what I would look for is you take it out and you let it be exposed to the light for a while. And
For a day or two.
If it has trumpet ancestry, it'll get quite dark. And you see that in the tiger babies. And you can get pale pink bulbs easily because a lot of the Davidii hybrids have that. Another way that I didn't realize, I probably had grown them for 25 years before I ever noticed this. If you've got a lot of tiger babies in the field and it's a hot day, it smells just like regalia. And you think, how many generations removed? But you can still smell it. It'll blow across the field and I can smell it. So a lot of times, if it's a true trumpet something, you will still smell that fragrance.
Okay, next slide. And then we have the blackest lilies are still Canadian lilies from the West. Oh, surprise, surprise. And Sun God is the top one. And In the Zone, which is Jim Sullivan's hybrid, is really the blackest I saw. I was comparing, I had all these dark black or dark red, blackish lilies in the field, and In the Zone was the blackest.
Look at that. And look at the inflorescence. That's really a wonderful, wonderful lily.
Yes, they're both fabulous lilies.
Yeah.
Next slide. Next slide, Lynn. We're stuck. We're stuck.
Like Lynn had to leave and she will rejoin. So maybe we could focus on a couple questions.
Yeah, we were let's see, where were we? Let me
I think we were just about ready for that.
For questions, yes, yes.
Okay.
Let me look.
She's coming back, but I've got one
back?
question about Lilium leclinii. There's a lot of discussion about true leclinii.
Oh, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that because I can tell you where that came from.
We'll get to that.
I have a question. I have a question for Judith. All the lilies that come from the lancifolium, they seem to have a very distinctive V on the petals towards, the center of the lily where the stigma comes out. And I'm just wondering if you knew if there's any particular reason why that is happening. It's like a very strong V-shaped brush stroke mark on the.
I would like it if you would send me a picture, and then I would know exactly what you meant, because I'm always looking at the papillae and the stripes and whether
Okay,
they're
I can do
parallel
that
to the
because
nectaries and blah, 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 because I do see a lot of things, traits like that. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
let's go on to the next slide. And then we have Night Flyer and Night Rider. I wanted to mention they have similar names. They are not the same lily. At one of the shows, there was confusion where somebody entered Night Rider with Night Flyer. Night Flyer is an Asiatic. It's an outfacing. It was hybridized by Burnett, and Night Rider, like we were talking about, is upfacing. And if you look at the color of the buds and the shape of the flower and the form and the inflorescence, you know they are two different lilies. Okay, let's go on. Next, we'll go on from there. Okay, now we're talking about more modern, different, the brush strokes again. Lily Allen was introduced recently. Loretto is an Loretto
Yeah.
is an old, that's the bottom left-hand side. That's an old brush mark, one of the first commercial brush marks that came out. And the other one on the right-hand side is John Hancock, which is being introduced in the
Look at
last
Lily
year or two.
Allen and see the white nectary furrows. See the frosty white nectary there. I think that's really pretty. But this is an illustration of how quickly they come in and out of favor in Holland, because already Lily Allen was the name of an entertainer from Holland. So it's not the lily named Allen, it's the lily named Lily Allen. And Niels told me that, it just sold really well for the lily garden. He has had it since I was involved with the selections, and he wanted to get more, and he can't get it anymore from Holland. So it's already close to obsolete after just maybe 2 years. But everybody loved it for the garden. So go
Next slide.
figure. Yeah. But I
Well,
thought Loretto was terrific.
oh,
Yeah.
Loretta, yeah, and you can't
Yeah.
get it
I
anymore.
loved that when it first came out. I thought it had a
Yes.
beautiful flower form.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Next slide. Oh, are you still there, Lynn? Okay. Now we're going to talk about our tango lilies. Burgundy Splash, Cappuccino, and Tribal Kiss. Burgundy Splash and Cappuccino came out at the same time, and for the longest time I had difficulty trying to figure out which one was which. These are two on the right-hand side. The top one is Burgundy Splash. This bottom one is Cappuccino. Now, Cappuccino has pubescence on the buds. You can just barely see there's a little fuzziness on the buds. And look at the color of the buds from Burgundy Splash to Cappuccino. There is a difference. There is also a difference in the color of the pollen and the style.
And
Now,
look at the bottom right, look at the white down the center along the midrib that extends from the nectary. There's a little white,
right there.
and you don't see that in the other two.
So you have to look at these differences when trying to figure out which lily you have. Now, the one on the left is one that's been introduced recently. It's still in production from the Dutch, and it's a tribal kiss. And you can look at the difference in the shape of the petals, and also you look at, there's a little bit of brownishness right at the edge of the tango coloring.
Mhm.
So you have to look at little things to tell what lily you have. Next. And then we have, again, the two Burgundy Splash, Cappuccino, and White Pixels is one that's come out. But look at the shape of the flower. Look at the color of the anthers. Look at the color of the nectary. And that will help give you guidance on what lily you have. Not just the color and not just the tangle effect. Next slide. Okay, we're talking about two old white lilies. In fact, the one on the right is Sterling Star, which was one of the very first white lilies in production. And the one on the left was probably closely brought out at the same time.
No,
Roma,
it was quite a bit later because it
was
was
it
a
quite a bit later?
tetraploid. Yeah,
Okay, okay, take
yeah,
that back. Quite a
yeah,
bit later, but they were still together
yeah,
being produced.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now you look at the pedicels on the right, and
Mhm.
you look, see how long they are and where the buds come out. And then you look at the spotting, you look at the color of the stigma, and then you look at Roma, which is little tiny spotting and has little pedicels, little tiny pedicels, and it's a clumpy head or inflorescence where Sterling Star lost favor because those pedicels were too long and the flower head was too wide for the
So it's
Dutch.
what you would prefer in your garden, but it doesn't fit in a Dutch cut flower sleeve. So
What that's it. Remember the Dutch breed for cut flowers. Remember they all have to go in plastic sleeves. That's why they like
and they,
up-facing flowers. And the pedicels aren't as long because they have to fit in a sleeve and have to be shipped.
Mhm.
Okay, next
And a
slide.
lot of the tetraploids don't work for that either because they're too crispy and
And crispy and they
they'll
break.
break. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and these are two whites that were from the Hartle-Gilman era. One was Indian Princess, and one is Sweet Surrender. Sweet Surrender is still around and is still
It's
in
really,
production.
yeah,
It's
it's
a really
really
good
a,
little,
yeah. And
yeah.
that was bred by the Cockers and it was bought by Homer Montel and I wrote the patent for him for that. So every time I see it, I think about my daughter that paid for her orthodontics, writing all those patents. But I love
Okay,
Sweet Surrender. It's really a nice lily still.
and the difference is again we have one's up facing, one's down to out facing. Look at the color of the pollen. Look at the spotting, and look at the style. Okay, just because it's white doesn't mean it's the same. Okay, next slide. Here we have two that were introduced around the same time. Do you want to talk about this one, Judith?
Yeah, and they were both bred around the same time, and but we were a little later to introduce the one
Okay,
Casper. The only one on the right was one of Lynn Marshall's, and he lived in the town of Casper, Wyoming. And the one thing I always liked about it, it was bred out of this freak lily albipane, he called it, that was an albino thing that came from Henry Payne that had a lot of Davidii in it, and it gave. You would never dream this would give you these beautiful hybrids, but all of its weirdnesses were recessive and its strengths were dominant. So we did a lot of breeding with it. But the thing I always liked about it, it had a pale, pale pink of flush, and a flush of pink, and you see that in the bud reverse. You even see it in the filaments. If you're standing there looking at it, the little stalks for the anthers, you will see they're also often pink. And I've seen lilies in which there can be as many as 3 different bands of colors in the filaments. So when you're looking at different stems of the show, you'll see things you hadn't thought about, and you'll notice the differences. So it was
okay.
much taller than
White
white prince. Yeah.
Prince, yeah, yeah, and a slightly bigger inflorescence
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's definitely a garden lily only. And
yes,
white prince was a more pure white because it didn't have this flush of pink
pink.
flush when it was cool weather.
Okay,
Yeah.
next slide. And then we have corsage. This was introduced by Jan de Graaf around 1961. Can you imagine? And it's still going. And we have to thank the Lily Company for reintroducing it, for cleaning it up and reintroducing it,
Mhm.
because I remember seeing it in the late 1990s as a tiny little plant with
Yeah,
tiny little flowers.
and when you get the virus out, it's quite tall, but the flowers still remain small
Right.
because the trait, and it came out of a lot of those. The trait for the small flower size also is linked with the no anthers or hard, or tiny anthers, and so you'll see in a population of seedlings that all the ones with tiny flowers also have the wonky anthers, and so it's kind of
Okay.
fun to see.
Next
But I
slide.
think this is a beautiful inflorescence. This is
Beautiful.
actually a triploid if you want to breed with it. So that's kind
Yeah,
of
it's
interesting.
very
Yeah.
sturdy. Next
Yeah.
slide. Okay, we're just talking about some older lilies, some of the older pink ones. Unique, Corsica, and Malta.
Mhm.
Unique was the top right-hand one. No, I'm sorry, I messed that up. The left-hand one is Unique. The top right-hand one is Corsica with the spots.
Mhm.
And then there was Malta. And
Mhm.
these were bred by Van der Zam Bulb Farms in in Oregon, correct?
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, Washington. I'm sorry,
It's the
Washington.
same company that now they use the name My American Roots, because they grow and breed everything, or they, it's all out of America, no longer out of Holland. And so, but at
And
the time they did this, the brothers in Holland, as well as Jerry Vandersam, were doing hybridizing. And that's where Eddie was doing hybridizing as well.
yes, and
Yeah.
these were the first, these were in the 1990s, and this is where the pinks were looking like in that time.
Yeah.
Next slide. Now we're going to talk about double lilies, our favorite double lilies. Let's talk. The picture on the right is Fata Morgana. That's still around, and it's a lovely yellow double. And it was named. And Fata Morgana is a witch in Holland. That's all I know. Next slide.
And look, go back to that slide
Okay.
for a second and look at you can see the little anther, what would have formed an anther if that had not
The
been
petaloids. The
the
petaloids.
petaloids. And so a lot of the things, and that's also, they're very irregular because they're affected by the environment, how cold the ground is when the bud is forming and things like that. So they're not constant, but you can see sometimes there'll be pollen coming off of these, or that their origin is almost entirely from the filaments, petaloid filaments. Yeah.
Next slide. And here are two that are still around. There's Ceres and Elodie. Elodie is the right-hand one. Ceres is the left-hand one. And you can see the variation in this picture of Elodie. As Judith said, these are petaloids, and temperature will affect them tremendously. Now, there was another one, Aphrodite, but that has gone out of production and it wasn't as strong. It's very similar to Elodie, but not as strong lily.
And you're right, Janus, that you do get the temperature. That's right, you'll get more pollen. Another thing is, a lot of times you think the anthers on the side are sterile, but if you slit them open with a razor blade, you can use the pollen a lot of times. So
see, some of them still have the anthers, not often like Ceres. Okay, next one. Okay, so now we have pot lilies being introduced, and Anna Maria's Dream was one of the first double pot lily, white, and it's a really tiny lily, but look how it's got a really nice flower. Another tiny double lily was Tiny W. And I'm just showing you Matrix was introduced around the same time. These were all true pot lilies, very short lilies.
And that's what Lynn Marshall was trying to, that's why he wanted me to do his embryos. He was trying to produce true miniatures that were very, very short with tiny flowers. Well, we got lots that were very, very short, but we didn't get too many that combined to that. I got some that were concolor hybrids, but so he used lawn, and this is not Neat Lawn, this was his father, the father lawn, who had a lily called Crimsonia that was a wonderful, very short red, and it was a parent of red carpet, that was Burt Porter's red carpet, and they grew lots and lots and lots of that everywhere for pot lilies. And it was a parent of Charisma from Oregon Bulb Farms, and they were getting shorter and shorter, but they were not ever popular because at that time people just didn't want potted lilies. And Catherine used to say, if in the catalog descriptions of our lilies, if we use, she said, this is the real S word, is short. As soon as you word short, people didn't want them in the gardens. And so you see how people's tastes change, and they sell this for something other than just colored Easter lily types. They're, so they've become very popular now.
Pot lilies are very popular now.
Yeah.
Next slide.
They were not then.
Right. Okay. These are two that are very popular. One is a pot lily, that's Delicate Joy on the left, and Red Twins. Now, both of these, especially Red Twins, Red Twin looks really nice here. You see those petaloids, they will look more like the one on the left, the petaloids there, if they're out in the garden and it's a hot summer. That doubleness will totally disappear, and that redness becomes washed out
at all. Yeah.
or orange. And the same with Delicate Joy. Basically, Delicate Joy is a pot lily and not a garden lily. Yeah. Okay, next. And these are some more of the doubles that are coming out. Yellow belly, top one. We have the two bottom ones are introduced this year by the Lily Nook. One is Double Lady and Double Trouble. I will make a comment that beware if you're going to plant them out in a garden and you have warm weather, you may not see much of a doubleness. Okay, next slide. Then we have must see. Must see, I can't stand, but it's something new and everybody's excited.
And it's exactly the same thing that you see in Tigrinum plentiflorum. You see it in inbred Davidii and Connecticut hybrids, this gene in which you got a little flower with no anthers, and you'll see the carotene pigments, the orange just blipped out. So it's something new to some people, but it's been around for probably 70 years, that gene.
Right. Next slide.
So.
Any questions here on the doubles? Okay. Oh, I should mention when we go into the Orientals, they have the Judith. Do you want to mention your double Oriental
I
and
had
how
the,
the
one
Dutch?
of the first, one of the first doubles was my lily that I call Flying Circus, and it just was a spontaneous thing. And its extra petals did not arise from petaloid filaments. It comes from the lower, what would be green in a lot of plants, the below the
sepals.
Yeah. And so that is exaggerated and increased. So you get this little flower that just keeps going out and stretching out. And that's where that gene came from. And I work with things a lot of times just because I'm curious as to how it works, where the gene came from. So.
Okay. Next slide then.
Yeah.
Brian, there's a couple questions in the chat.
I saw the question about a pot lily and a garden lily. A pot, we used to say, no, that's not the right thing to use back in the days when pot was still illegal. So we always called them container lilies. It just means something that's short enough that it grows well in the container. And to sell in the floristry trade or the forcing trade, for it to be sold as a pot lily, it has to be short enough to fit into their racks. So it's actually the size of the machinery and the racks that they put on the trucks. It has to be short enough to fit that. If it's a little too tall, you're out of luck. But a garden lily just means it was not bred for forcing. It was bred, and you looked at other things. You looked at disease resistance, and you looked at how strong is the inflorescence, and you looked at you can have a long inflorescence, not a little short one that goes into the sleeves. So pot lilies are a category of forcing lilies usually, but it just means short. Garden lilies mean everything that is going to endure in your garden.
Okay. And yeah, pot lilies are not, well, they're designed for container lilies. And they were starting in around 2010. Just before that, I was in Holland in 2010, and all the hybridizers and their hybridizing greenhouses, they were into getting container lilies at that time. And nowadays you see a lot of them in the springtime. You'll see lilies. They're in containers or pots. They are blooming at the garden center and you love them. You can put them in the garden, but a lot of them won't last because they're designed specifically.
Those older ones, if you had red carpet or charisma, it would last. If you had cribsonia, it would last 40 years. So, but those were bred like in the 60s when they still had to be, border lilies. That's true. They just have different terms that they just mean they're short.
They're short, very short.
Janice has a question.
Yeah. What's your question?
Yeah, I was just wanted to comment on garden lilies. So in my opinion, garden lilies are lasting more than 3 years in a garden. I just talked with two Dutch growers, wholesalers, and they always said that these lilies, which were usually bred for cut flower trade, they usually disappear in the 3rd or 4th year, and they didn't like it either. So they are now the try to push for a more longevity in these flowers. So 3 or 4 years, more than 3 or 4 years.
And I think people who pay a lot of money to get a new variety, they're not too happy that it can't last in cultivation more than 2 or 3 years.
Because they have to transplant them all the time in fresh soil. So now they are trying to tell growers that they have to plant the lily propagating material and grow them only for 1 year at one place, and they have to rotate the soil all the time, and they don't have these soils which are low in pathogens and nematodes. So that was just
Okay.
my comment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go on from there.
Sorry, one more question. There was a question about what red Asiatic lily that doesn't fade in the sun.
Well, I want to tell you first something about what makes a red Asiatic lily. You think it's one color, but it's a blend of colors. And if you cut through the petal, you would see that the top layer, the skin on top, is little shiny cells that run sideways, and they are pink or raspberry, or they're all the same colors, like Mardicum dalmaticum or the color of Speciosum rubrum. Those are the same pigments. There's only one of those. And then the middle cell layers could be white, yellow, orange, cream, and it's the ones that are dark orange, like the color of a pumilum from the carotenes in the middle layers, and those are all scattered out. The cells are all loose and scattered, and the air goes through. And then you've got this pink rose raspberry skin on top. Your eye sees that as red. And so what happens, the pink anthocyanin, the pink part is always going to be affected by the light. It's going to, and by the coolness. If it's cool, that's going to be deeper. If it's a good bright light, it'll be deeper. But if it's too bright a light, it'll just burn off and be gone. And if you've ever pressed a flower, if you press a pink flower, it's going to be white. But if you press a yellow flower, it's going to be like butter yellow. It'll hold its color because the carotenes, the middle layers, hold their color.
So to answer the question, you have to figure out what is best for your red in your garden.
But that's
Okay.
one reason that when you photograph them, you'll see it as a beautiful deep red in your eyeballs. But when you photograph it, the light bounces back from those two different cell layers. And so that sometimes they'll look quite brown or they'll look quite bluish brown. Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on where you're growing your lilies and what kind your climate. So the red that you want, you have to experiment and find out which grows best in your garden, and then you'll have your red lily.
And I think, work with those fabulous dark red Canadian lilies that I think we should all bow down and say hooray for you for breeding those things. Yeah.
Okay, Connecticut King and Connecticut Beauty. Connecticut King I've introduced. It's an old lily. It was one of the, after Enchantment, was Connecticut King was the major production lily. And the important thing of this, it's one of the first spotless lilies. And that's
really strong and tough. A really good, talk about longevity, breed with Connecticut King.
And so everything was bred with Connecticut King, and and Connecticut Beauty was bred around the same time too, but Connecticut King went on and on and on. Next slide. Now we have, again, we're going to talk about different lilies and how you can tell the difference. Dreamland, Pollyanna, Sunray, they were all being introduced or grown at the same time. Dreamland is the lily on the top. Pollyanna's the lily on the left, and the bottom right is Sunray. Now you look at the color of the anthers, you look at the color of the stigma, you look at the shape of the flowers, that'll give you direction on what is the variety, what is the cultivar's name and what cultivar it is. Dreamland was a really good grower, a tall, strong plant. It had really more cup-shaped flowers.
Yeah, if you had any little bits of it anywhere in the field, you would still have bulbs 5 years later.
Yeah, it was a really good grower. Pollyanna wasn't quite as good a grower, it had longer pedicels, and Sunray was a shorter plant. That's all I know about it. Okay.
Pollyanna, Adelina, there was a whole group of those, and they were all from Wilsoni flavum across Connecticut King. And the ones with hardly any spots were the ones, and they were all, I wrote the patents for those two for Oregon bulb farms, because the main difference would be these teeny tiny details. One would have 7 spots on the inner tepals and one would have 5, but then they were bred because they had slightly different times to force. So if you had several of those, it would flower over a long time.
Period of time.
But you remember what I said, if you get familiar with the species, you would look at these and you would know they were all hybrids from Wilsoni flavum. And you can also tell that by the fact that they're later to flower.
Next slide.
I can't. I'm gonna have to.
These are two older lilies. One is now back in production. That's lime ice.
Mhm.
And the other one at the top is Edith. And Edith, do you want to tell the story about Edith? It's a
Edith
beautiful lily.
Johnson was the Graf's secretary, and she worked at Oregon Bulb Farms from the time she was 18 until she was 68. So, I mean, she stayed there after he left. So, and then later on, after she retired, she typed Eddie's letters. She lived near us. But I really love the form of Edith, and it's really greener than lime ice is.
Yeah, and
And I do,
it's
there
got a
are still bits of
large
it
flower.
growing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very large flower.
Yeah, very elegant.
Large
Very
buds,
elegant.
long petals. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next. And then we have yellow blaze and suntan. And these are the last of the Asiatics basically to bloom. And the difference is you look at the buds, you look at the stem color, you look at the anthers, you look at the stigma, and then you have to look at the shape of the flower and the color of the petals. Suntan, this was well named because it's
It's got
yellow
a
with
little flush
spots
of
and it's
pink.
got a little
Yeah.
tan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yellow blaze was a group of, so you may not get, they're all very similar in the flowers. The plant
Yeah.
structure may be different, but the flower structure and color is pretty well the same as the one on the
Well,
left.
have you ever seen pictures of the lily that was first introduced out of Japan and that called Marlin Ross, and nobody could figure where it came from because it came in as rogues with I think auratum or something like that imported from Japan. It's the yellow form of wilsoni, and so now we know what that is. And if you cross it with yellows, they'll all be yellow. The flowering time will be intermediate. It will usually have these big honker spots, but they are really strong lilies.
Strong growers. And these are garden lilies.
Yeah.
These are garden lilies, late and garden lilies. Next slide. And then I was just mentioning the tangle. The very first tangle that was introduced was Latvia or Latvia's Promise. And that's that top flower right there, the top one. And there are stories about it that one of the bulbs was smuggled out of Latvia, and that's where the tangles started because they were breeding tangles way back in the 50s in Latvia. And then it was smuggled out in the 80s, and then we got all these other tangles. In the bottom picture, I show you Lionheart. And Lionheart, you can see how far the tangles have gone from the top flower to the bottom flower, how much things have changed. Next slide. And then there's Tiger Play and Music Art. Again, these were introduced at the same time. Don't ask me why. But anyways, you could tell there's a difference, but it's unless you're looking really closely, you sometimes think you get mixed up. So Tiger Play, you notice the spotting is closer to the center, where Music Art is spread out and it's more diffuse. Also, the buds are longer and larger in Music Art, and the flowers
it also has a splash of big spots on the outside of the markings.
Right, where
And
Music
so that's
Art
very
doesn't.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Orlina and Pup Art are others. Orlina, you can still see once in a while. It was the smaller plant. Pup Art was a little larger, more vigorous, but you look at the stigmas, you look at the anthers, and Pup Art would fade. It would become more orangey, where Olina stayed red. It really was a lovely red tangle lily. Really maintained its color. Next slide. And then we have the easy lilies. I'm just putting these out because this is what's in production now. There's Easy Vanilla, Easy Dream, Easy Whisper, and Easy Dance. Now, Easy Dance, we're going to have problems with. Next slide. Because I have taken out pictures, and these are all easy dances. Which one is the true easy dance? I don't know. Came out of Lily Company is producing these, distributing them, and they're Griesbach. This is some of Griesbach's material.
Hybrids.
So whether
and he did a lot of those with like the one on the right. You see how the anthers are shaped like little short arrows, and that's very typical of his. Whereas the one in the middle is that's what you get all the time when you inbreed with a lot of these things. It's not like some rare special thing, and they always have smaller flowers. The one on the left, I can't tell what the anthers look like, but
They,
that
they
just
look
looks
they
like
look tiny
normal.
too. Yeah, but
Yeah.
and so these are all called easy dance, and time will tell which one is the true easy dance. Okay.
Well, and they sold out of Holland, 10 or
Yeah, yeah.
15 years ago. They sold a lot of cultivars that were, and they had the names mixed up, and that originated a lot of these questions.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, here we go. King David and Lectilinii. Would you like to go ahead, Judith?
Well, I think that what is sold today as Leech linei does not look like what I know of as Leech linei. It doesn't have the same inflorescence. It is extremely similar to the lily that I called King David, because I could very clearly see in the inflorescence that it had not just a Leech linei inflorescence, which would have the flowers straight down. It's got a lot of Davidii in it, and I can see that right away. If you grew Davidii, you would see it too. You would know right away this is not just pure
Look, and
Leech
you have
linei. Yeah.
you,
So
you
I
have to
mean,
look at the
yeah,
pedicels
look at the pedicels, look at the fur, where it is, where where
and look
that
at the
is.
bud color. Look at
Yeah.
that bud color. And some Lectilinii has black stems and some have green
Yeah.
stems.
Yeah.
So depending on which subspecies, variety or variation it is. But the King David is what is being sold now as
Yeah, and I
Lex
think
lily.
they did that because I got irritated. They would, in one of my catalogs, they bought practically everything and they were selling it under the same names in Holland, like Elusive and some of those. Even lilies that I had already discontinued because they were too susceptible to a virus and things like that. And so I think they just started to give them a different name, you know.
And it's
But
a much better
yeah,
grower. King David's a much better grower than the species. So
yeah,
it's hard to
yeah,
tell the difference to the average individual. But look at the color of the buds.
yeah.
You will not see that pinkish color in the species.
No, and the true Leech linei is pretty late to flower, and it's later than King David. So
Right,
that's
because
another way you can
King
tell.
David's earlier. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Next slide. And I just thought I'd mention Nutmegger. This is a classic lily from Stone and Payne from the 1960s. If you can get it, get it. It is a fabulous garden lily. Look at the inflorescence, and this is classic of Nutmegger on the right-hand side. It has spots,
Yeah.
it has yellow.
And it's got the true, I mean, that comes from tigrinum. It comes from the diploid tigrinum. And you see that in all those hybrids out of pink tiger that have secondary buds. You've got this same thing, and they come out of this angle. And if it has tertiary buds, they can stick straight up. So it looks awkward, but they're still just wonderful in the garden because they bloom for such a long time.
Okay, yes, blooms forever. Anyways,
Yeah.
next slide. And then we have another controversy, yellow Bruce versus yellow pinwheel. Now, the picture on the left is from the Lily Company, which is the only distributor of yellow Bruce / pinwheel. Okay, that's the picture they have in their catalog. The B&D had the center picture as yellow pinwheel. That was from their catalog. From Lily Nook on the right-hand side is yellow Bruce from his catalog. Now, they're all slightly different. And go on to the next slide. Now, yellow Bruce, my yellow Bruce looks more like the right-hand side. See the size of the inflorescence and the shape? That's not the same as the Lily Company, the previous. Now, I did some photoshopping, not as good, but you can see how the brush mark can change when you do some photoshopping. And you notice the brush mark on the right-hand side for yellow Bruce. It's sort of in between. It's not quite as strong as pinwheel. My opinion, pinwheel and yellow Bruce are the same thing. I'm just going to, but there
And I
is
think
variation.
again, it's from photoshopping and from the fact that you can't reproduce it so well in a printer's ink.
Ink.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is a picture of a
Thank you.
slide. But
Okay.
I mean, you see that right away because you see yellow Bruce always has those stripy brush marks. It's not,
Right. It's
and
not a
it certainly
true brush
doesn't
mark.
have it's not a bronze color like that.
Okay. Next. And then there's chocolate canary and chocolate event. They're both named, have chocolate in their name. But if you notice, the one on the left-hand side is chocolate canary. Look at those buds. That's a
Aren't they
beautiful garden
gorgeous?
lily.
And
Yes,
look, it has a very distinctive shape of bud too.
yes,
So you can
yes.
look at that bud shape and you know the tepals are going to be super wide.
It's a gorgeous lily.
Yeah.
Chocolate event is a nice, but it's just chocolatey tangle. Next slide. And then I've got some ones that look similar, but they're different. There's Gardenia, that's the far right. There's Happy Memories, that is in production right now. And Tokyo, which was an older one. Look, they're both, these all are bicolored, but look at the nectaries, look at the shape of the petals, look at the stigma, look at the color of the anthers. That will give you direction on
Look
what
at the
lily it is.
nectary star in the middle.
Yes, yes, yes. And the next slide is giraffe in Tokyo, giraffe in Cancun. I'm sorry. Giraffe in Cancun. Giraffe is spotless, and Cancun has few little spots. The color is very similar, but the shape of the flower is slightly different. And that's how you can tell. Now, I thought the bottom is a slide of mine when I was searching through. I thought it was giraffe until I compared the two of them. And you can tell that it isn't quite giraffe because there's a slight difference in the nectary and the pollen. So you have to look at those things when trying to identify plants, okay?
Giraffe was also rather tall and a little later flowering. You could
Right,
see
right.
the tigrinum in that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Next slide. And then there's Forever Susan, Forever Linda, and Forever Summer. Forever Susan's the excellent one. That's the good grower. The other two, I think you're going to be disappointed. That Forever Susan is an excellent, excellent garden lily. Next slide. And then we have Nettie's Pride and Stracciatella event is on the side here. It's an outfacing. Look at Nettie's Pride. There is a variation in the color of Nettie's Pride. Look at the shape of the flower. Look at the shape of the pedicels. Now we get to the next one. Next slide. Patricia's Pride, Purple Rain. Now the inflorescence, they're both umbel inflorescence. Okay, but if you look at the flower, you look at the pollen and the shape of the flower, and then you can distinguish between these two. Oftentimes, you will get one from a when you go to a retail place, they'll say it's Nettie's Pride and maybe Purple Rain, or you'll get Purple Rain and maybe Nettie's Pride. But if you look at the shape of the flower, look at the color, look at the brush mark, look at the anthers, then you can tell the difference. But why purple Patricia's Pride? Patricia's Pride was introduced by Lilium Company in 2006. It is probably Purple Rain that's been cleaned up by tissue culture.
I agree. Okay. Yeah.
Next slide. Then we have Lollipop, and now they've introduced Sugar Love, so be careful. Again, we've got similar colored flowers, but the shape of the flower tells the difference. And Lollipop's been around. It's a very short border lily. It does grow well in the garden, so it's not just a container lily. It's a border lily. But they've introduced Sugar Love, and they've seen what they've done. They've sort of made the names similar enough so that you can get mixed up. Next slide. And then we have My Joanne, which was originally, it was called Pearl Jessica by Lilium Company in 2005. And then in 2010, they called it Pink Flavor. Again, if you look at the plant, you look at the flower, you look at the stems, then you can tell. The color is not as the color can vary because it's a pink depending on the temperature and when it was flowering. Okay, next slide. So My Joanne was the first Pearl Jessica. This today is the latest version of Pearl Jessica. I think the one on the right is the true Pearl Jessica, but the two other pictures were labeled as Pearl Jessica. So which one is the true one? I'm not too sure.
I think you would have to see a long, I think you'd have to see a long inflorescence and to
Right.
see the angle of the petals. And what can also happen is when they pick up lily, the common lily symptomless virus, the pedestals get suddenly short. And then you'll think it's different because of that, but you can tell the angle is always the same. So.
Okay. Next slide. Red velvet, another great garden lily, an old variety. Judith, do you want to talk about this?
Oh, this is a wonderful lily. It's a triploid, and I just love it. And there was a question: does it bloom the same time as what is sold as leech now that I think is King David? And yes, they are. It's very late, just like the other one.
And
But I really like this, and we got our bulb from Joe Mattis long ago. So it was before ever there was another clone that was called this that I know of. So what we have is the original one.
where I
And
think
you always can tell because the anthers are light colored, and if they get watery, if you get water on them all, the anthers will look it's really distinctive. There's always a little red stripe from the nectary furrow or a little orange stripe out of the nectary furrow. And the anthers, if you look at the pollen and the anthers, you can see how thin the anthers are, and it's because it is a triploid, and you can get some embryos, but not many. I've never gotten many out of it, but it's a wonderful lily. And there again, it has pink in its bulbs because a lot of the hybrids that have Davidii in them do have that.
okay.
So, but they're never like the deep purpley color that you get. They used to call them red bulbs in Holland. You don't ever get true red bulbs that you would get with a trumpet.
Next slide. And then we have the Pearl series, Pearl Melanie, which is the yellow, Pearl Lorraine, and Pearl Francis. Also, next slide. We have Pearl Stacy and Pearl White. I mentioned these because they are in production right now, and you'll see them in the garden.
I think the latest Asiatics will carry on into a late July and very, very, or in August as well, depending on where you are. And I'm talking about where the most of them are like mid-June. So that is quite a bit later
Okay, next slide.
in the fields.
And then we have lilies that are similar in color, but if you look again, now Robinson's Comet is a very old hybrid. Look at the lovely pink. It's been around forever.
Don't you
Now-
love the spotting pattern? Look at the stripes.
And look at the
center.
spotting pattern.
Yeah, I
Yes.
just love that.
And you look at the anthers and you look at the stigma, and that's how you can tell the difference between not just by the color and the spotting. Okay, next slide. I got my favorite now, Tinos and Uncle Albert. Tinos, bottom right-hand picture. You will not see Tinos look like that. That was raised in a greenhouse at a certain temperature. What you will see Tinos in most of your gardens will look like the upper right-hand picture without the spots. See how
Well, it's just what we were talking about. The anthocyanin pigments are the ones that are not so stable and are affected by temperature. And so they're not going to be there under non-optimal conditions.
So whatever the picture shows you now, the one on the left, that's closer to ideal of what you'll get in the garden. You'll
and
get a
in
little
our
bit
fields,
pink.
yeah, in our fields where it was cool at night, I would
You
get
would get that.
that.
You would get that. Not
Yeah.
the bottom one, but most of you will get the top one when when warm nights and warm mornings, the pink totally disappears.
You'll
Okay.
see that in a lot of the OTs as well, where where they get you cross it with a big red something and it has the blotch confined to the center, but if the light levels are not exactly right, it'll just be very pale.
Okay. Next one. And then I'm mentioning a couple that are still in production. Warren Summers hybridized these with Rosella's Dream and Trogan. There is a difference in the spotting and the shape of the petals. Rosella's Dream is out-facing with darker anthers. But they're very similar, but different. Okay, next. And I mentioned these two because I think these are worth getting. I was very impressed with Pink Country this year. It was the darkest, pinkest color, almost exactly like this side. I was just amazed at the pink. And Giannis was telling me how the white country is an excellent grower, and it does look so. I'd recommend these lilies if you want a nice garden lily. These probably will be it. Next slide. Oh, and I just had to put a plug in for my lily. Blue flash, pink morpho. And I called it blue flash because if you look on the slide on the left, it's got a little bluish color. It's not in the color. It's just that there's a translucency to the petal. And you'll see it more, a little bit of this sheen on the far right-hand side. Now, the lily company bought the bulb from the auction, and then they decided to produce it. And then the Dutch registry called up me and asked, you can't name it Blue Flash because it's not blue, it is pink. So that's when we named it Pink Morpho, because the Morpho butterfly is not blue, but it's the iridescence, that's the shape of the scales that give it that blue flash. Next slide. It's an optical illusion for your eyes. And I mentioned peaches on chocolate. It made the what is it? The
popularity poll. Isn't that
yes.
nice? It's really beautiful. Look at that. That is just about a perfect stem, because each flower can open completely without being smashed by the other one. And it just, and I can guarantee you that if you grow that and get big bulbs, the inflorescence will just keep getting longer.
That's right. That's what happens.
That's
next. And now we're finished. Finally, that's one of my varieties. I couldn't resist. Finally, we are finished. The end. And any questions again? Which Asiatics have the most scent? I guess
Oh.
that would be tiger babies.
Well, I would say the ones that are hybrids that have some, the Lankongensi hybrids all have a certain amount of scents. The Pumilum hybrids, we bred with those, and it's not always a great scent, but you can smell it. That's why I would like for somebody else to try to breed with monodelphum into the Asiatics, because that would still be strong and, resistant. So there's work to do there to breed for fragrance, because you get a lot of surprises with a lot of the OTs.
Maybe when they bring the monodelphum at Walmart, then we can do all this breeding, because right now you can't find it anywhere.
Well, a lot of times that's why we were talking about trying to get some buds for somebody like Darn Cook who grows it well. That's a way to do it, that you can share pollens. And that's why, like the round robin I was in all those years ago, we used to share everything. Ruth Class always said, if you have a new hybrid and you think it really has potential, send a little piece to at least 3 people that
That's right.
are interested
so it can
in
spread
this
it around.
Yeah, because things can happen, and it can be lost. But
yes,
I don't think you'll ever see monodelphum at Walmart, because
I don't think so.
it doesn't move. The bulbs don't move well. You lose
they don't transplant
80 or 90% of them when you dig them.
No.
So.
And you know why? That's because if you look at the ones, if they hardly make any stem roots, that's why. Yeah. Because it takes them a year to get over being.
If you do get a bulb, you'll get it. It'll just scale itself in the ground, and you'll get bulblets from the disintegrating mother bulb that you've got.
Hey, do you have some, Colin?
I've got seedlings, like little ones.
Oh, okay.
Well, take care of them.
Oh yeah.
Oh, well,
from Dharma, actually.
And I love that fragrance. The Lily Thealcovia, that's an F1 hybrid with monodelphum cross bulbiferum, or a bulbiferum hybrid, has a wonderful fragrance. And that word in Russian means it smells like what they call in Russia a night violet. And so it's I can't remember the genus of plant, but it has a wonderful fragrance. And I like the fragrance of monodelphum. Some people don't, but I think it smells wonderful. I used to just love that in the field.
I have a question about pollen color, using that to identify varieties. Don't you find that the pollen color actually changes with time? Like, when the anthers first open, it can be one color, and then over 2 or 3 days change to a different color.
It can also change. It can also change just from irrigation. That's one of the things I would notice a lot.
But it's one of the indicators to help identify, and it's a cultivar. Colin, we can't call them varieties anymore. We have to call them cultivars. Judith
variety is a
reinforced that. I couldn't resist. Okay, which Asiatics are late bloomers?
The
And how
latest,
late are
Yellow
they?
Bruce, yellow
the Wilsonite
blaze.
flavum hybrids and the
Yellow Blaze and Suntan
yeah,
are the
yeah,
latest, and they'll bloom at
those
the
are the
end of
very
July.
latest. Red velvet, and I had some from Maxima Wixii that I called like Last Dance. Because I called it that because it was really late. You
Oh,
know,
Last Dance. I remember that. Yeah.
yeah. I still have a few little pieces as they didn't get frozen in this storm. But yeah, those were F2 hybrids from Mondelf from what am I trying to say?
Well,
Maxima Wixii.
okay. Okay.
There, it
Okay.
seems like there was a question that I didn't answer that somebody asked. Does somebody still have a question that flashed up there and I forgot to answer it? Maybe it
Can
was.
I just get you guys to clarify again between King David and Lichlinii?
Well,
So Lichlinii does not have any pink on the bud,
no,
and King David might have
it
sort of a
might have,
pinkish
yes,
tinge
yes,
on the bud.
right.
It's just a touch. Yes.
It looks more like, if you look at the inflorescence, one looks more like, it's got King David has a typical inflorescence that's got more Davidii in him. That's why I called it that.
Which means that it's got more buds on the inflorescence, like a
Yes.
I'm gonna do a thing in which I'm gonna do some to show you the differences in bud morphology, in bulb morphology, the differences in inflorescence, the placement of the secondaries, the angle of the pedicels, things like that. And it soon becomes just like when you look at those tiger baby things, you see right away, you know where that inflorescence came from. And when I would see the one that I call King David, I mean, I'll take some pictures that show it. It's easier to show it.
So Colin, what she's saying is what they call Lichlinii now from the Dutch is really King
But it's
David.
not Lichlinii.
And
Yeah.
because again, the real Lichlinii, it had smaller, more wimpy stems.
Yeah, yeah.
It wouldn't grow as tall, and it would spread all over the place. It was really, whereas King David, it's there, it's nice and straight, can be 6 feet tall, and it has that beautiful inflorescence.
And the
that
real Lichlinii
pyramidal
is not
shape.
such a deep yellow either. It's more like the yellow of Tigranum flaviflorum, you know.
Yeah, it's a lighter yellow. Yeah, it's not quite the gold flush on it.
Yeah.
And if you got Lichlinii maxima causi, or I don't know how to say it, that the
Maxima
red
Wixii,
form of
yeah.
Lichlinii, would that more likely be a true Lichlinii variety? Or
If you got the real thing, Maxima Wixii, yeah, you would know for sure. And there was a wonderful clone that was unspotted that we used all the time in breeding, and that was the parent of all the brush marks. That's where that gene came out in this second generation. But I think that was probably a clone that came out of Japan probably from 100 years ago, because they kept all those things. And I wish I had it. I've got to go back and look through some of the really old pictures and track down some of those, because you would see there are certain things you would see it immediately if I could show you a picture. So I'm
sorry to harp on, but one final thing: if you had Maxima causi, the red form, that form would be the true form of Lichlinii.
Yes. And there's always a certain variation. So what I'm telling you is just my opinion. When I look at that, it looks like exactly what came out of my catalog when they bought all those things. And so that's what I think.
There's a couple other questions on the chat. What picture source would you recommend to utilize to most accurately identify cultivars? When you
go to the shows, go to the shows.
The shows.
Well, the Lily Nook has really accurate pictures.
Yeah.
Also, the Lily Garden. I probably will be making up a folder that will give the variety, the cultivar. See, I did it again. The cultivar and a picture of it, and we're going to work on embedding the name into the picture so it'll be a reference source.
Yeah.
But that is in for the future, okay?
And I think that'll be helpful to people, because in different parts of the country, a lot of those that are pastels and things will show some variation, just like the spreckly, stardusty, tango pattern that will show variation with light levels, and some of them. That's why I call that variety elusive, because sometimes the carotene color would predominate it, sometimes
it gets washed out.
Pink would, so no two flowers would ever look quite the same. but we can kind of come to realize what's in the normal range. Yeah. And I kept in my old things, I always kept the RHS color numbers. And that's tricky too, because you've got to do it on a, not out in the full blazing sunlight. You've got to do it.
Do it in the,
Yeah.
when it's, or else was cloudy. That's the ideal time.
Well, that was and also you used to be able to take pictures with Kodachrome film, and that would show you the true pictures of the pinks and so forth. And the film, then they switched over to Ektachrome, and they were never true. They were fine for yellows and oranges.
Too bluish. Ektachrome was too bluish. Yeah. Yeah.
And Herman Wall always said that you have to take them before 10 o'clock in the morning or in the late afternoon, because,
on a cloudy day is ideal.
Yeah, and use ASA 200 when it's just about to drizzle, and it'll be perfect.
Oh, that's even better.
Well, we have a lot of that in our fields, but
okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's another one. Does yellow Bruce have a fairly square stem? I have seen it disqualified at 2 shows because of suspected fasciation.
Okay.
I have no idea.
It does. But you'll find that all large inflorescent flowers, and that would be a large inflorescence, they will have a squarish stem right at the beginning of the inflorescence, because the stem has to get wider to support all those flowers.
That's right.
So you're supposed to say that this is an intergeneric thing, and it's a cross between a peppermint and a lily. And that's why it has that stem. Really throw them off. Yes.
Yeah. No, you'd have to look past, you'd have to look about 6 inches from the inflorescence. If the stem is square and it's more not square, but flattish, that would be your fasciation.
And find out if it has Edith Cecilia in its background. Then you'll know for sure.
Why?
But you can't expect a big flower head inflorescent to be supported by a wimpy stem.
No.
It's a natural phenomena. It's very much like your shoulder muscles.
Right. You'll see that in the LAs.
The other comment I have is about lime ice. True lime ice has 4 knobs on the stigma. I had that way back when, and Eddie McRae did put out a lot of nice hybrids, including the Connecticut King series that came out of there. There was Joanna, and one was Bonnie. I don't know how popular that was.
I think that was mine, and that didn't have anything. It had
Bonnie
was a pendant pink, so it wasn't
pendant pink. That's
You're
right.
Thinking about the ones that were Pollyanna, Adelina, and they were all Connecticut King cross Wilson.
The Bonnie I crossed with my Joanne, and I have that hybrid now.
Oh wow! I think that's great.
I've been propagating it, and that's
good.
Called Gaylord Nelson. It bloomed on Earth Day. It was a really weird situation because I planted seed and everything was thrown off, and it bloomed in my living room for the first time. But I have that in my garden, and it's been it's done very, very well.
Hang on to that and spread
it around.
Okay.
I like it a lot.
Anyways, any more questions?
I have a question.
I have a statement to make.
Oh.
I would like to see some of these people get together at the next show this summer to talk about some of these problems that we have, identifying in a round table. I think it would be worthwhile to set something like that up, or just get together as a group.
I think these virtual meetings are wonderful for that.
Yes, they are.
Because you can see at a show, you only see what's in that season, immediate season, like within a few days of the people who come. But with a virtual thing, you can see all sorts of things. But I had one other question. Somebody had a thing that just a minute, it flashed across the screen that they had a form of Leachlinii. Who was that, and what did you say? Because I wanted to get that. I wanted to understand it.
Well, it was called Iwashimizu, if I can even pronounce it correctly, and that was from Gene Merrill.
Oh, well, if it came from Gene Merrill and he said that's what it was, I would believe anything he said. Yeah. I don't know anything about that, but do you still have it?
I think I still have it. I hope I still have it.
Would you share a little piece
Yes.
if you do? And I would love to spread that around because that's how you would tell. I was trying to get in touch with Gene not long ago and I sent him an email, but I hadn't talked to him for a long time and I haven't heard anything back. Is he still at the same place?
I think he's still at the same place, but actually I have not talked to him in a while.
Yeah, I
and
hadn't
I
for
will
a
look
long
him
time.
up.
And then I thought, well, maybe that's not where he is, or maybe he just doesn't have time to answer my stupid question. Could
Oh,
also
maybe
be.
something's
But if he
going
tells
on.
you that something is something, you can count on it because he certainly knows the species well.
Yeah, I
So
think
I would
so.
like to, and then there were clones. See, I always thought that clone of the spotless, the Maxima Wixii, Maxima Wixii form unicolor, that had to have a cultivar name in Japan, but we never got it. But it traced back to way back. Ruth Class is the one that we got it from, so that was a long time ago. But it was extremely vigorous. Yeah. All the
Okay, well,
things
this
that came
one
out
did
from it.
have spots. It was yellow at
Yeah,
spot.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the normal form would, so
Right, yep.
that's why the other one was called a unicolor, but
Yeah, got it.
I would, yeah, keep in touch with
Okay.
me about that. I'd like to
Sure.
see it, know more about it. Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Talking about monodelphia. I've grown it for quite a long time now, and I can look for some pollen if you want.
I couldn't hear you.
I've grown monodelphia for quite some time.
I still couldn't hear you. I don't know what.
He's grown it for some time,
Oh, yes, yeah.
but he's coming from New Zealand, so
Yeah, so, well,
Yeah, it flowers most years. This year was a bit of a failure. The flowers with that helium just broke.
maybe you should get some buds and send them to Judith so that we can get
Yeah.
some tissue culture going.
yeah, I would be
Righto.
glad to do that.
We'll have to talk to Martin about that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Because doesn't Martin grow it too?
I haven't seen it in his, I've been in his shade house quite a lot lately and I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, okay.
And if you
I'll
do
talk
want
to
something like
Martin.
that in tissue culture, you must send at least 3 separate clones, so you won't end up with an inbred population.
Righto, well, I've got a clone from 2000 New Zealand Lily Society seed, and it's been grown here for a long time.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, excellent.
Exterior flowers, which will be in December. It always flowers before Christmas here. And if someone can educate me on how to send it to Judith and how to get it into your system, do I have to go through a math thing? We have math, which is protecting our society or protecting our lily culture from all bugs and stuff.
Yeah.
If someone can give me all the information I need, I will send it to you.
We'll work on that, Rex. Okay.
Yeah, I would love to
I'll work
help you
with.
do that.
I'll work on that with Judith.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
would love
Sounds
to do
good.
that. Yeah.
A reminder for the next session will be Sunday, February the 11th, starting time. That's a Sunday, not a Saturday, the next time. Remember that it's a Sunday, and we'll be doing with martigons and all the interesting martigons that you can grow. And we'll be talking to one of the experts from Alberta.